So this is our little reminder that I should be recording. So as we go to the next slide, I just want to provide you a little bit of background on who we are. Those of you who haven't been on the webinars before, STEMx is managed by Battelle. And basically, we're a consortium of 21 statewide STEM education networks. We're really excited to be able to provide services to allow states to share best practices, learn from each other, and harness the power of so many states coming together to do bigger and better things in STEM education. You can always follow up with me later to learn more about STEMx or just to talk to me about anything that's going on within the network. But today, really, we're focusing in on what one of our STEM networks have been doing to really understand how STEM is perceived within their state and what they're doing with that information. We're really fortunate to have Jesse Gillum from the STEMx network, or from the Washington STEM Network, talk to us about this work. Jesse does amazing work with the Washington STEM Network as their communications director. He's been really key in our work at STEMx in producing a few communications materials and resources that other STEM networks can provide. And we're often looking to Washington STEM for a lot of their communication resources, and so we're just really excited to have the expertise of Jesse with us today. And so with that, Jesse, why don't I throw it over to you? And also I'd just like to make the note, if folks do want to jump in with questions, feel free at any time. Just throw them up on the chat or to raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can get in.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thanks as well to all of you for attending today's call. I really appreciate it. Today I'm going to talk to you a bit about our state poll that we do. We do it every other year to figure out where voters are with STEM education, how they're feeling about STEM education, what they see as positives about it, what are some weaknesses. We do this both for messaging reasons, to see what messages work the best, but we also do this to really see what our progress is in terms of getting access and awareness about STEM education and getting positive attitudes towards STEM education. So I'm going to go a little bit into the poll results, but what I'm really going to talk about today is why we do the poll, why we decided to do the poll, how we chose the vendor that we decided to do the poll with, a little about our results, and about how we use our results as well, because I think that that's been some of the most interesting work that we've been doing, is figuring out where these results actually make a difference. So this slide here is just a sneak preview. Oops, if you can back up to the last slide, sorry. Just a sneak preview of the sort of things that we have discovered through our poll. So 94% of voters in Washington believe every child should have access to a high-quality STEM education. So you can get some really great information from these polls that we've been able to use pretty effectively. Now you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to set the background a little bit about what's happening in Washington State in general. Probably a lot of you on this call already know that Washington State, especially with Amazon coming here, with Microsoft having been here, is quite the tech hub in the United States right now. And we are not only a tech hub for those high-end tech hubs, but we've got a lot of things going on with advanced manufacturing, with healthcare, with the maritime industry, with agriculture, ag tech, all sort of stuff going on. The BCG, Boston Consulting Group, recently did a study here in Washington State that finds that 740,000 job openings will be in Washington over the next 5 years. And we found from there that about a third of those will be STEM-specific jobs. So there's quite a few jobs that are going to require very specific STEM skills. And a lot of those jobs also, of course, require STEM-adjacent skills or just the strong background that STEM education needs. We've got quite a high earning for STEM jobs. That's $42.12 an hour. That's double the median earning for jobs in Washington State in general, which is at $20.23. So that's just something that we like to point out when we're working with folks. And these go across the board, not just the jobs that require a 4 degree or a graduate degree. It's jobs that require just seated firmly in the middle skills economy. So jobs that require technical training, apprenticeships, 2-year degrees. in the work that they're doing. So that's just to set the stage of Washington in general. Next slide, please. So what we do at Washington STEM, we are an organization that was founded 6 years ago to advance equity, innovation, and access for students in STEM education. So we focus on increasing STEM access, interest, and success for all students, and we focus particularly on underrepresented students, mostly students of color and girls in the STEM field. We do this work we build partnerships across communities, across education, across business leaderships to advance STEM education in their areas. And we also work to leverage resources. So we find great programs that work, and we push those forward and try to bring them to scale. And we also work on policy front, in state policy and also a bit federal policy, working to increase availability of STEM education on those fields. These two other bullets on the slide are part of a statewide goal that is happening that a number of organizations have bought into, and we do as well. So that means that we're working to have 70% of Washingtonians earn a post-secondary degree or credential, and then to attain high-demand STEM degree and credentials among students of color and women. If you could go to the next slide. They're all across the state. Most people from out of Washington think Seattle when they think Washington. We've got quite a bit of area that is rural in Washington, quite a bit of area that's hard to reach, mountains dividing things, all sorts of geographic barriers that come across. So we've found it's very important to work within Washington, all across Washington, by having leadership positioned all through Washington State. So much like STEMx, we're a kind of mini STEMx with that, having networks across Washington State that are sometimes are housed in education districts, nonprofits, Chambers of Commerce in one case. So we work with 10 networks all across the state. So if you do the next slide, I believe is the poll. So I just want to learn a bit about who you all are as an audience. So I think that Julie's going to pop up a little poll about who has done state polling. So I know who I'm talking to. A minute.
Have been doing the poll already.
Okay.
Oh no, see, I see people starting to answer the poll, so I just made it live.
Great. It's like there's only a button to answer A.
Yeah. That one.
Well, since we're a relatively small group, maybe if someone has done polling before, if you want to write in the chat box, that works. Polling before, just find the chat box and say yes, I have.
Oh, you know what? It came up as questions instead of separate.
Oh. It's always something. Well, this is one thing about polling, and having an effective research partner can make a big difference in how your questions go. So I've seen
data from Google, but not STEM in general. They do to some extent.
The Gallup poll.
Yeah. Utah does some data collection. And then you have some of your Washington partners on, actually, and Wright Mockler, that they use your data.
Nice.
Google Polls, and also Bethany is saying that they have done some polling of STEM programs in partnership with their national partner, and they're just south of you with Oregon.
Okay, nice. Good. I'm glad to learn that. Thank you. I just wanted to see a bit about where people were with state polling. If you go to the next slide, please. So, without thinking about why should we do state polling, we had a couple of these main questions that we wanted to look through. So we wanted to know what voters in my state know about STEMs, because when we started Washington STEM 6 years ago, there was, as many of you probably have had the same discussion of, should we call something STEM when people don't know exactly what it is? Is that an education moment, or is that something that's going to get lost? Then we asked, well, what do voters know about STEM education, or we wanted to know that. How do voters feel about it? And then what STEM education issues do they support specifically? So we started this polling out about 6 years ago, right when our organization started, because we wanted a baseline to see how an organization like ours that does outreach all across the state, how it can be effective. And this gives us some concrete data rather than anecdotal data about how we're effective. Next slide, please. So we thought about a number of ways we could do polling, informal polling, anecdotal and qualitative data, all sort of stuff, but we realized what would be the best, especially since we're using a lot of this polling work to go to our legislature and ask for funding for STEM education and prove that there's support around STEM education, widespread support throughout the state. We decided to form a formal partnership with Strategies 360 to get this work done. So they are a very experienced polling organization. They're mostly out of the West Coast, but they've done quite a bit of work, especially with election polling, and has gotten one of the things they tout that is that they are within 1.8 points of the final results in 12 elections. So they have done that sort of work, and they were able to help us structure a poll that had a 4%. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just a quick question. I was curious, did you guys have like an RFP or an RFI to get information, or how did you find like potential folks to work with?
Great question. Thanks, Michael. We did. We sent out an RFP to a couple polling organizations that had high reputations within the area that we worked with at the time. And from that point on, we've just stayed partnered with Strategies 360 because it's a consistent piece, because they're doing our polling data well and effectively. So I can get you all a copy of that RFP if it's something that you're interested in for follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great to have in hand. I'm sure, if other folks are interested in starting this process, they would appreciate having that as a starting point.
Absolutely, because there's a lot of questions that we had at first, especially that we've since figured out. The first, whether the RFP and questions were a lot of, what don't we know? And now we've figured out a lot of things, and they're happy to share that so that folks can start a little bit ahead of where we were. So what Strategies 360 does with us is they do 600 live television, live telephone interviews that are about 15 minutes each, and that gets us to margin of error of plus or minus 4% for this polling. It was a pretty big investment for us at the time, and it continues to be. It's around $30,000 to work with Strategies 360. If they want to do regional oversampling, so that's if we want to say, what do voters in Vancouver, Washington think, or what do voters in Spokane think, they charge us some money on top of that as well. But we have found that this has been money well spent in a partnership well spent and well built. So next slide, please. So the first thing that Strategies 360 did with us after they accepted the bid was put together a timeline on this polling data. And another thing that is about working with a partner like this is these folks do this all the time. They know how long things take. They know when things work and when things don't work. So you can see here the polling from our first call with them this past year to the end took about 2 months. And I will say that was very fast because we had a lot of the polling survey questions already done. The questionnaire was very similar to the ones from the past 2 years. What I've been told, I wasn't there when it started 6 years ago, but the initial drafting the questionnaire process took another month on top of that as people were putting together information and data from that.
So a month, you said, to figure out what the questions would be, is that what you're saying?
Yes, because it was really, there's a limited amount of questions that you can put in a poll, in any sort of poll, And you know, there was just a lot of vetting between our policy committee as well as staff at Washington STEM, and then about what are the right things, what is the right universe of things we want to ask about. And then Strategies 360 helped structure the questions so we got at the answers in the right way. So the next piece, as I mentioned, a lot of this was vetting the questions. So we have some questions that we ask every single year. So we get longitudinal, you know what I mean, data about what's going on. And we have some questions that are relevant to the particular year that we're in. So for example, I put two questions here. This first question on the top, and I know that the print is a little bit small, but the first question on the top is one that we've asked since the very beginning. So we'll hear the abbreviation STEM several times throughout the survey. Before today, have you ever heard of that? And so you can see we have this data from 2013, 2015, and now 2017, where in 2013 only 32% had heard of STEM, and in 2017, 62% had heard of STEM. And I think this speaks, I mean, it speaks to Washington STEM's work, but it also speaks to the profile of STEM throughout the United States in general. But it's just really interesting data to use, and folks find this very valuable and interesting to engage with as well. And what Strategies 360 did is went to them, we said, we want to know if people know what the word STEM means. And then they're able to structure that with their survey experience into a question that is doesn't have accidental bias or things like that. So that's how this came from. And this is actually a piece of a script that they give their folks to set out. And we've got the entire script, too, that I can also give to you all after this call.
Do you have a sense of what the overall total of people who participated in the survey or were called?
Well, no, 600 participated in the survey. I don't know how many they called in order to get to 600, but I'm sure I could find that out for you. It's one of those things where they just didn't tell us. So
yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah. And then the question below that is about we have a focus this year at Washington STEM on career-connected learning opportunities, so internships, apprenticeships, things like that. And so we wanted to ask if voters thought that it was important for students to have access to those sort of opportunities. And Linda asked, is this random or targeting calling? It is random through voter lists. It's a regional cloud, and then it would be people within a certain zip code. So I'm going to show you a bit about the product we got from Strategies 360. So they gave us this 51-page report. Well, first they gave us just all the crosstabs, all the raw data we can get. So that was very helpful for those data geeks that like to sort through those sort of things. But they also consolidated it up into this analysis that presented to us. They both sent it to us and did a webinar much like this one where they presented what's going on from their perspective. So if you can go to the next slide. They gave us an executive summary. So you can see here, it says STEM education continues to be regarded as a critical part of the school system, and found that voters have a strong appetite to public education to focus on STEM learning and preparing students for careers. So it was, you know, they gave us some really great high-level points that we could take. We took some of this to op-ed meetings with editorial boards, ensure that folks knowing about what happened in the detailed information with education through this poll. The thing that we found is that, as it's saying here, they also pointed out some of the perceived weaknesses of what goes on. So voters know STEM workers is on the rise, but are underwhelmed by the quality of STEM education. So that's something that came through again and again throughout the poll. So it was an interesting piece. If you could do the next slide, please. And this, they also gave us a number of these handy graphs. So you already saw this, but you know, they showed us trends over time with these graphs and what was going on with that. And next slide. also broke down, which this is something that we find very helpful when we're working with our legislators from rural areas. Some of them, a lot of them say, well, station is great for folks that are in the city who want to get a job at Amazon, but what about folks from my small town? They've broken down, Strategies 360 broke down all of the data into urban, suburban, small town, rural, white voters, voters of color, men, women, and then put some key things about what's going on. So the fact that rural voters are the least enthusiastic about the quality of STEM education is something that resonated with legislators of, oh, maybe we need to increase that quality there. If you can do the next slide, please. All right, so now I'm getting into the how do we use the results piece.
Quickly,
go ahead, Michael.
With the results, the analysis, was that all done by the firm, or did you kind of did anyone at Washington STEM kind of take the raw data and do their own ad hoc analysis or post hoc analysis?
The firm was really great about providing the bulk of the analysis that we did. Of course, we were eager to poke through it ourselves, so we definitely did that work. But also went and one thing that was great about the firm is, for example, we needed a lot more data, specific presentations about rural voters, because that's, again, what our legislators wanted. So I was able to pull out, oh, I saw this trend happening, is that true or not? And so the pollsters were able to work with us to put together a set with that. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Perfect.
Great. And Linda asked how large was the question set. I believe there were about 23 questions on the set, but I can send you the complete list. It's actually available on our website, washingtonstem.org, but I can show it to you after as well. All right, so now we will move to how did we use the results. You could go to the next slide, please. So we put together, this is on our website as well, we put together an infographic of some of the most compelling data that was the poll. You can see here career-connected learning. We found that 94% of Washington voters think it's important for students to have career-connected learning opportunities. So that was something that we put forward quite a bit. And that's something that folks have been finding very engaging. And this is one part of a larger infographic piece with a lot of interesting points. And we found that this is getting, the infographic in particular is one of our most popular items on our website. It also gets shared quite a bit on social media. It's something that people find visually appealing. It's something that they can turn to pretty easily, and we can cut out bits and pieces of it to use for different products. If you go to the next slide, and there's another piece of that infographic. We really wanted to point out that education in the whole state is great, but also STEM education in various regions. A lot of 79% of Washingtonians agree that if increased focus on STEM education will improve the economy in their specific region. So that's something we wanted to point out, that it wasn't just that Seattle voters felt that, voters throughout the state felt that. And as I mentioned, social media, we had it quite a bit on social media, and I think with this one, we put maybe $50 behind advertising as well. But as you can see, we got 46 shares out of this, which means it went had a reach in terms of posting this work. And we also have a free download of the graphic available. We've gotten a lot of teachers that might want to put this up in their schools, as well as this is helpful for folks in small businesses that want to prove quickly about Washington STEM. We also made the infographic into a little portable sheet we give away at various things. And next slide, please. And so then we've also worked with these specific polling quite a bit with media. So this is 3 media clips that we got out of this polling. So we did put out a press release with the data when we got it. We didn't get, I would say we got traction right away with the press release. It sort of just was one of those things that fit out. But then when we were able to use the data to follow up, and we were able to embed it in other work that we were doing, the pitch became a lot more effective than, oh, here's another survey from a STEM organization, and STEM is great. Using the data to actually support a bigger message ended up being the most effective piece for us. So the Yakima Herald and Skagit Valley Herald, you can see there, they both used data in different op-eds that they did, which was great. And the news piece is, this was a sponsored piece. Freelink, a cable company here, actually paid to get sponsored media done with. They decided to focus on Washington voters supporting STEM in schools, so that was a nice piece as well. And I would say we got quite a bit of traction. This year we had a campaign to an op-ed or an editorial in every area, every network's major newspaper as part of our legislative asks, and so the supporting data and poll work was very effective with that.
So putting together the survey, did you see this kind of broad set of audiences there already, or was this something as you pulled the data together, you have found places where the data fit a communication need that arose at the time?
I would say it's a both-and situation. I think we started the polling very specifically for policy and advocacy purposes, knowing that we want to have some sort of benchmark and go from there. But as we got this polling data and as we realized people are hungry for information that is a vetted resource, we found it's been useful in all sorts of different ways.
Have the hubs been excited to use the data as well?
Absolutely. All of those things just referenced, the Yakima Herald and the Skagit Valley Herald, those are all editorials that were written by our networks as well. So it's been very helpful. Only one of networks decided to do a regional sample this year, but they actually made their own infographic based on things, and were able, they had a special interest in onboarding business members of their community into their STEM network, and that they found the data is very effective for those business members, and they found we're very happy with their investment in the polling data. And then this is also on the statewide level, so we have this thing called stem.wa.gov that a government agency operates now that tracks different STEM data, and they are tracking as one key indicator are Washington residents aware of the meaning of STEM. So you can see here that the data has made it to a government website, and is something people can check out when they look on what is the Washington government doing about STEM. So that is ends my official presentation. I'm seeing some questions already, which is great. Question from Linda, and I'm happy to take questions at this point, or if anyone has anything of their own to share about data, that would be wonderful. So Linda asked about how did you fund this project? Was it through grant funds or indirect costs? The first time we did the data, it was funded through a grant from a private foundation. The second and third times, we didn't have that grant focused on that particular issue anymore, so we used general funds for our organization because, again, we realized it was a strong investment.
A Washington Foundation, or was that like a national funder?
It was a Washington Foundation.
So, as we wait for other questions to come in, something that stood out to me was just, the richness of the data and the different ways that you were able to utilize it to speak to different audiences. And, one thing I'm always curious about with these types of efforts are, is there anything within this process that didn't work well that you want to do again, or that you would suggest other people skip that part of the learning curve?
I think and I wasn't here, so I think we got to skip that part of the learning curve too, but I think coming up with the specific questions was a bit of a slog to work through, because with only 20 questions on a survey and you have 50 questions you want to ask, how do you narrow that down? And we even had that a bit this year, I would say, because about 15 of the questions stay the same from year to year, but there's 5 that we have some room to play with. So we had to jettison one question about national learning standards, for example, that we had asked in years past. And that was a difficult process, because it's like, well, we won't have that data one year, and if we skip it now, we'll continue to skip it. But I guess in that case, I just really recommend make clear that the survey questions are aligned with your priorities and aligned with what sort of messaging you want to share with legislators and what sort of messaging you want to share with media, because I think that's been the most helpful things. We've got a lot of useful information, but there's been several questions we go back to again and again and again.
I see here Linda is kind of pointing towards the power of having voter data. You're talking to legislators, and I'm curious about, so how has this information been received? It looks like you guys have put it out and shared it widely. Have you seen it being well received? Have there been requests for additional information going forward, or has your kind of campaign that it was used for been successful?
I would say so, for sure. We had a relatively successful legislative session this season where we maintained funding for computer science and are working right now on different avenues for funding for career-connected learning, and a lot of that was what our poll focused on this year. So that was a very powerful thing. I see Linda is mentioning that vote data makes legislators sit up and listen, which I think is very true. They are voters that they're polling, but we chose to maintain the word voters very particularly for our legislative audience, to remind them that this is the folks that they worked for. So that really helps with that. And I think we found that one of the things we find a measure of success is when people start quoting our data back to us of 94% of people know what STEM is, or that sort of thing. I'm like, oh, you saw that somewhere and you're using it. And so that's been a really nice indicator of that it's spread and the validity it has. I will point out one thing is there have been some folks, and I alluded to this earlier, that are like, well, of course the STEM organization is going to come out with data that shows STEM is important. Yes, in some ways that's true, but having the partner Strategies 360 help us go through that and have that unbiased making the survey and conducting the survey adds a lot of credibility to us in terms of doing that. And also, deep in the data, we can show, well, there's some weaknesses with this and that. And so it's more than, it doesn't paint an entirely positive picture, but it paints a compelling one.
Yeah. See here, Green is just asking too for access to the survey and maybe your thoughts on, what were the most relevant questions at the end of the day.
Sure. Access to the survey, absolutely. Michael, is there a way to get the people on this call, or whoever you find appropriate, this information?
Yeah, definitely.
Great. So I'll make sure after we're done here that I send the survey along to Michael, and you'll send it out through the avenues that happen. Great.
Yeah, we have through the registration, so we should be good.
Awesome. And what was the second question? I'm sorry.
So, you mentioned, you kind of had narrowed down to the most relevant questions. I'm curious, from those 20 questions or so, are there kind of most relevant or most useful that kind of fleshed themselves out of even those 20 questions?
Yes, the ones I showed, really, the STEM awareness piece is very useful because it's a trend that we find changing over time. Do you think STEM is valuable? That stayed the same over time, so that's very nice to know and point out that voters are still finding STEM valuable over time. the things that we found that both those high general level and then very specific things are the things we keep coming back to. So how voters feel about computer science in particular, and that's something that we keep coming back to. The mid-level ones, things about the quality of STEM education or perception sort of questions. We don't use it much in public, but we find it very helpful in terms of thinking about with program work of, well, this isn't really resonating with voters the way that we think it might be, or we might need to tweak this a different way.
I'm also curious from our colleagues who earlier mentioned that they've done some surveying in Utah or in Oregon or other places, if they have lessons learned from their efforts or things that they've done that they think have been really key to the success of their surveys. So is there anyone if there's anyone interested in kind of sharing some of those lessons learned about their process, you can either raise your hand, unmute yourself, send a comment as well too there. Not at this time.
Can attendees unmute themselves, or is that something you got to do?
I'm pretty sure I need to do it, honestly. At least if they're on the computer. I think on the phone they might be able to unmute themselves. But not 100% sure. Kent Clarine is asking to get unmuted, I believe. So, Clarine, you're now actually unmuted.
I'm sorry, my name is missing a letter. I'm actually Clarence, but...
Clarence, sorry.
That's fine.
You sound more like a Clarence.
Yeah. I wanted to second the value of participating with a third party. We've done a lot of voter polling. We've done a lot of teacher opinion, student opinion surveys, just understanding how programs are perceived and how people value them. And we have that done. Our third-party evaluator is a consortium of universities here in the state that's analyzing that data for us. That the at least people's perceptions of the efficacy of the data that they're looking at. I know that was already said, but I think that's important here. And then most of the other lessons that learned here have a lot to do with not making mistakes with implementation and communication when we're trying to get things out to stakeholders.
Speak to that a bit more, Clarence.
So we actually have a tracking document for all of our programs that we have been tracking the lessons learned and things. It's largely implementation related, so not necessarily survey related, but it all relates back to the surveys when you're surveying who are participating in your programs. I really want to look into more of what you're doing with surveying voters in general. I like what you said about measuring things as voter specific.
Mm-hmm.
That would really make an impact in the thoughts of the legislators here.
And it sounds like Bethany in Oregon is also kind of interested in doing more public voter surveying, as they're currently have been targeting STEM providers about what they provide, who they're partnering with, funding, and also, not just providers, but educators as well. And let me just see if I can. So I'm just quickly unmuting you just to check, too, if you want to add anything in there, or some comments on what I've been learning from the surveying in Oregon.
I don't have been capturing the same data that Jesse had, but what I was just also going to add was that there are other entities and organizations who have been collecting similar data, and so some of that, sharing back the data that we've collected, or often sharing back data that we've heard from others. And so trying to figure out where our role is in not duplicating the efforts, but making sure that we're getting really clear data that we want to be able to share. So how might we partner with people who are doing this work, or is it our work to figure out key questions that are going to help us tell the best story where we're at in that?
Consultant or another group to help with that data collection?
At this point, not specifically. We've done some narrow researcher that we've worked with to put together some, our program survey evaluation, and then we've worked with the Pear Institute to do program level research, but we don't have another outside entity that we're working with for this vote survey piece.
That's great. Well, like I said, we'll get the survey out at least to have those questions, public, and if there's interest in following up with Washington STEM or anyone else across the networks, we can potentially put up together follow-up calls as well. So,
real quick, there is a very important lesson when it comes to surveys. If you're that we found in Utah, if participants made the mistake one year of not having a control group, kind of a comical, because we surveyed students' perceptions of STEM at the beginning of the year and then again at the end of the year, K through 12 students, and found that they were worse at the end of the year than they were at the beginning of the school year, which probably speaks largely to the fact that students are excited about school at starting and hate school by the time it's ending, and has nothing to do with STEM. Having some sort of a control, if you are working with participants about what's happening with similar people who are not participating, is very helpful.
Nice.
I just want to check in too real quickly. I see that we have Lee Rhodes as well, and I know they've done some data collection and reporting a few years ago in North Carolina, and I don't know, Lisa, if you guys are planning on doing something similar again, or if you want to say anything about how that report was useful within your context. You're unmuted from our side, but we're hearing you if you're still there. Text a message that she's still here, but we're just not hearing you. We're able to. You might be on one of the phone lines. I'm gonna unmute a few of these. Can you try now?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I think what you're referencing, Michael, is the STEM scorecard that we produced. And it was not a polling piece or a survey piece. It was a document, and still is a document, that looked at various different domains of STEM in North Carolina, pulling lots of different data sources together to paint a picture of the status of STEM. Was produced, and we produced 3 different versions of it. There was the big version that was really small rough copies of that, but it had all of the data in it, and then we had a shorter, I think, 12-page view, and then a shorter still executive summary. We used those documents with members of the General Assembly, business and industry, and school administrators and community leaders. We do any kind of pre and post in terms of the effectiveness of this, but it was a good way to engage the audiences. And there were certain issues that that been pulled out of there that we would use repeatedly. One of the statistics we used was that after the road system, the second most used resource in the state was a public TV station, network of public TV stations in North Carolina with their science and engineering programming. We are in the process of doing this report again. Our initial plan was to do it yearly and realized that the collection is a little bit inconsistent because some of the data points that we use get updated every other year, some get updated every year. So we needed to have a little more time for that. And we also felt like when we started doing the second one, that the difference year to year was going to be so subtle in most of the categories that it wouldn't be very useful. That had a little bit more time between the report cards may allow us to show some trend lines. We are to have this, it's with the designer now, and hope to have this in September to be able to share again. And take a look and see, it seems it's useful to continue to do this. If we get traction, if there's interest in it. It's a big enterprise to pull this off, and not inexpensive, and it takes a long time.
And so, Jesse, each year you guys have to assess whether this is getting the kind of return on investment for you guys every time.
Absolutely. And so far that answer has been yes, but it's a question that we do ask, and like our last speaker, Lisa, was saying, that every other year has found to be a better baseline for us than did every year. And just so you all know, I sent a little bit ago in that box a link to survey resources, which is our press release about the survey, but it's also got the top line data. It's got the key findings overview and presentation and infographic. And in top line data is actually the exact way that we asked all of the questions.
Fantastic.
And realizing, looking at this, so there's actually 50 questions in the survey, but a lot of them are demographic questions, or what's your age, or that sort of thing as well.
I see we're coming, nearly to the end of our time here, so I just want to check if there are any lingering questions or comments that folks want to share. And feel free just to text if you want me to unmute your line or send a chat message. All right. Well, seems, Jess, is there anything else you want to mention before we get off the line here?
No, I really appreciate everyone's time, and thanks again to STEMx and Michael for hosting this. And if you have any questions or any thoughts you want to share, my email address is right there. It's Jesse, Jesse, @WashingtonSTEM.org.
Thanks so much, Jesse, and we really appreciate you sharing this out and agreeing to share the survey as well. So I'll follow up with all of our attendees today and everyone who registered with that information after I get it from you. And you'll be able to attend next month when we talk about the Army Education Outreach Program and what our various states across STEMx have been doing with this program, and learn more about how your network can get involved or how your region can take advantage of these programs and funding as well. So again, thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.